The skies over Millfield had turned an ominous green-black, the air heavy with the electric tension that precedes disaster. 16-year-old Lily Harper clutched her hospital wristband, her thin fingers tracing the words, "Oncology patient," as she stared in horror at the funnel cloud forming on the horizon. She never should have left the treatment center. The doctors had warned her about the approaching storm system, but after 6 months of chemotherapy, after losing her hair and 15 pounds from her already slight frame, after watching her single mother work double shifts to cover the mounting medical bills, Lily had just needed a moment alone, a moment to feel something other than sick, scared, and helpless. The old Carpenter Bridge had been her sanctuary since childhood, a place to think, to breathe, to feel normal. But now, as the tornado carved its destructive path directly toward her, normality seemed like a luxury she would never experience again. Her phone was dead. The wind was too strong to run, and the nearest shelter was 2 miles away. As the roar of the approaching tornado drowned out even her own terrified breathing, Lily closed her eyes and accepted the unthinkable. After fighting cancer for nearly a year, she was going to die alone on this bridge. Then she heard it. Not the wind, not the splintering trees, something else, a mechanical growl cutting through the chaos. Engines, multiple engines. Lily's eyes snapped open as the rumble of motorcycles crescendoed against the storm's fury. Through the sheeting rain, she made out the impossible, a line of bikes pushing directly into the storm's path, toward her. The lead rider's weathered face came into focus as he brought his massive bike to a skidding halt at the bridge's edge. The patches on his leather vest told a story. Marine Corps, Afghanistan, Purple Heart. "We've got about 2 minutes before that funnel hits," he shouted over the storm, extending a gloved hand toward Lily. "You coming with us, or just admiring the view, kid?" This is the remarkable true story of how 19 veteran motorcyclists risked everything to save a stranger's life, and how their split-second decision forged a bond that would change all of their lives forever. If stories of extraordinary courage in impossible situations move your heart, subscribe now to witness one of the most incredible rescues ever documented. Lily Harper had always been a fighter. Born 6 weeks premature to a teenage mother with no partner and limited resources, she had come into the world already battling the odds. Her mother, Jessica Harper, had been just 17 when she'd given birth, too young to have figured out her own life, let alone how to guide another's. But from the moment she'd held her tiny daughter, Jessica had committed herself to giving Lily every opportunity she could. For 16 years, they had made it work. Jessica had completed her GED while caring for an infant, then taken night classes to earn a nursing assistant certification. They had moved from a cramped studio apartment to a small but tidy 2-bedroom rental on the outskirts of Millfield, a Rust Belt town that had seen better days but still maintained a tight-knit community spirit. Lily had grown into a thoughtful, determined teenager with her mother's resilience and a quiet intelligence that impressed her teachers. She wasn't popular in the conventional sense. Her second-hand clothes and inability to participate in expensive social activities set her apart, but she had a small circle of loyal friends and a passion for photography that gave purpose to her solitary hours. Then, 3 days after her 16th birthday, Lily had discovered the lump. Hodgkin's lymphoma, the oncologist had explained 6 agonizing days later. Stage 3. But the 5-year survival rate is good, about 80% with proper treatment. Proper treatment. The words had seemed straightforward in the sterile confines of the doctor's office, but they quickly translated into a brutal regimen of chemotherapy that left Lily nauseated, exhausted, and barely recognizable to herself. Her thick brown hair, the feature she had always considered her best, fell out in clumps until she finally asked her mother to shave it all off. The weight dropped from her already slender frame until her collarbones protruded sharply beneath her skin. Jessica had done everything possible to support her daughter through the ordeal. She'd taken on extra shifts at the nursing home where she worked, stretched their meager health insurance to its limits, and applied for every assistance program available. But the financial strain was crushing, and the emotional toll was even worse. "You don't have to stay with me every minute," Lily had insisted, after catching her mother nodding off in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside her bed. "I'm 16, not 6. Go home and sleep in a real bed sometimes." But Jessica rarely left her side, becoming as much a fixture in the oncology ward as the IV stands and monitoring equipment. The only times she reluctantly stepped away were for her unavoidable shifts at work, and even then she called to check in hourly. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. That April morning had begun like many others in Lily's new cancer-centered existence. She had woken early, nauseated from the previous day's treatment, but determined to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Jessica, having worked a night shift, was sleeping in the small cot the hospital staff had set up in Lily's room. The weather report playing softly on the television had caught Lily's attention. Severe storms forecast for the afternoon, with potential for tornadoes. In Millfield, situated in what meteorologists called Tornado Alley, such warnings were taken seriously, but weren't unusual for spring. "They're moving me to the imaging department for some tests," Lily had told her mother when Jessica woke around 9. "You should go home, get some real sleep. I'll be stuck in MRI tubes most of the day anyway." Jessica had hesitated, eyeing the weather report with concern. "Those storms look nasty. Maybe I should stay." "Mom, the hospital has backup generators and storm protocols. I'll be fine." Lily had forced a smile. "Besides, you need clean clothes. You've been wearing that same sweatshirt for 3 days." Eventually, Jessica had reluctantly agreed, promising to return before the worst of the storms hit. What Lily hadn't told her mother was that the imaging department appointment wasn't until 2 o'clock. The morning stretched before her, hours of sitting alone in her room, staring at the same 4 walls that had been her primary view for months. The decision to leave had formed slowly, then all at once. Just a quick trip to Carpenter Bridge. An hour, maybe 2, of freedom before returning to the controlled environment of the oncology ward. She'd be back before her mother returned, before anyone even noticed she was gone. Lily had become adept at moving through the hospital unnoticed, wearing a knit cap over her bare scalp and the jacket her mother had left behind. She blended in with the visitors and outpatients that moved through the main lobby. The security guard had barely glanced up from his phone as she'd walked past and out into the spring air. The freedom had been intoxicating. For the first time in months, Lily wasn't defined by her illness. She was just a teenager walking down a street, feeling the breeze on her face instead of the sterile circulation of the hospital's air conditioning system. Carpenter Bridge stood about a mile from the hospital, an old steel and wood structure spanning Miller Creek, which wound through the western edge of town. It had been closed to vehicle traffic for years, deemed structurally unsound by the county engineers, but pedestrians still used it as a shortcut between neighborhoods. For Lily, the bridge held special significance. Her earliest memory was of standing on it with her mother, dropping sticks into the creek below and watching them float away. Throughout her childhood, it had been their special place, where they'd gone to celebrate good report cards, to release biodegradable lanterns on New Year's Eve, to talk through the difficult moments of adolescence. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? The bridge had looked the same as always when Lily arrived. Weathered boards, rusted railings, the familiar creak underfoot as she walked to the center and leaned against the side. Below, Miller Creek flowed swiftly, swollen with spring rains. Above, the sky remained overcast but calm. Lily had lost track of time, absorbed in the hypnotic flow of the water and the momentary peace of being somewhere that held no medical equipment, no pitying glances, no reminder of her illness. She'd only realized how late it had gotten when the wind began to pick up, bending the trees along the creek bank at unnatural angles. By then, The sky had changed dramatically. Dark clouds rolling in from the southwest, the air pressure dropping so rapidly that her ears popped. Lightning flashed in the distance, followed by the ominous rumble of thunder that seemed to vibrate through the bridge itself. Lily had pulled out her phone to call for help, only to find the battery dead, another effect of chemo brain, forgetting to charge it. The first fat raindrops began to fall as panic set in. The hospital was too far to reach before the storm hit. The nearest businesses were closed for storm preparation, and the bridge, standing exposed above the creek, was possibly the worst place to be during a tornado. She had started to run toward the western end of the bridge when she'd seen it, the distinctive funnel cloud descending from the churning sky, touching down less than a mile away. The tornado's roar had filled her ears as debris began to fly through the air. Tree branches, roofing materials, objects she couldn't even identify, transformed into deadly projectiles. Lily had frozen, terror overriding her rational mind. The tornado was moving directly toward the bridge, and she was trapped in its path. Meanwhile, at the VFW Post 1917 on the east side of Millfield, 19 veterans had gathered for their monthly motorcycle club meeting. The Storm Riders Motorcycle Club had formed 5 years earlier, initially as a support group for combat veterans struggling with PTSD and the difficult transition back to civilian life. Mike Sergeant Reynolds, a former Marine Corps staff sergeant who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, had founded the group after losing 2 fellow veterans to suicide within a single month. "The military gives us brotherhood, purpose, structure," he'd explained to the first handful of members. "Then we come home, and suddenly we're supposed to navigate the world alone. That's not how we're wired. We need the mission. We need the unit." The Storm Riders had evolved into more than just a support group. They raised funds for veterans' medical expenses, organized job fairs, volunteered at the local VA hospital, and performed community service throughout Millfield. Their leather vests, with the distinctive lightning bolt insignia, had become a familiar and respected sight around town. That April day, they had gathered to discuss their upcoming Memorial Day charity ride when the emergency alerts had started blaring from everyone's phones simultaneously. Tornado warning. Immediate shelter advised. Confirmed tornado touching down near West Millfield. Moving northeast at 35 mph. Jackson Doc Wilson, a former Army medic who now worked as an emergency room nurse at Millfield General, had immediately pulled up the weather radar on his tablet. "It's on the ground near Miller Creek," he announced, his voice tight with professional concern, moving right toward the hospital. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. Sergeant had immediately thought of the hospital's layout. The oncology ward was on the 3rd floor, with large windows facing west, directly in the storm's path. His sister had been treated there for breast cancer 2 years earlier. He knew the evacuation protocols would be moving patients to the interior hallways and basement, but how many patients were too ill to move quickly? How many might be caught in rooms with shattering windows? "We should head over there," he'd suggested. "They might need help with evacuations or emergency response." The other riders had agreed without hesitation. This was exactly the kind of mission that gave their civilian lives meaning, using their training and teamwork to help others in crisis. Within minutes, they were on their bikes, ignoring the pelting rain as they headed toward the hospital. Their route took them past Carpenter Bridge. Sergeant, in the lead position, had almost missed the small figure clutching the railing in the middle of the structure. A flash of lightning had illuminated Lily's terrified face for just a second, long enough for his combat-trained eyes to register her presence. "Hold up!" he'd shouted through the team's helmet communication system. "There's someone on the bridge!" The line of motorcycles had skidded to a halt at his command. Through the intensifying rain, they could all see her now, a painfully thin teenager in an oversized jacket, frozen in fear as the tornado carved its path directly toward her position. "That's a cancer patient," Doc had called out, recognizing the distinctive hospital wristband even from a distance. "Probably from the oncology ward." Sargent had made the decision instantly, with the same clarity that had saved lives on the battlefield. Roberts, Williams, continue to the hospital. Alert them about the missing patient. Everyone else with me. We've got less than 2 minutes before that funnel hits the bridge. As 13 of the veterans continued toward the hospital to assist with the broader emergency, Sergeant Doc and 4 other riders had gunned their engines toward the bridge. The wind was so strong now that they had to lean their bikes at precarious angles just to maintain a straight line. Sargent had reached Lily first, bringing his Harley to a sliding stop at the edge of the bridge. "We've got about 2 minutes before that funnel hits," he'd shouted, extending his hand toward her. "You coming with us, or just admiring the view, kid?" For a moment, Lily had stared at him in disbelief, unable to process that rescue had appeared in such an unlikely form. Then survival instinct had kicked in, and she'd grabbed his outstretched hand. "I can't drive myself back," she'd shouted over the storm. "I'm too weak from chemo." "You don't have to," Sargent had replied, pulling her toward his bike. "You just have to hold on to me." The next moments had been a blur of motion and terror. Sargent had helped Lily onto the back of his motorcycle, placing her arms firmly around his waist. "Don't let go for anything," he'd instructed. "No matter what happens, keep your grip." The other riders had formed a protective formation around them, Doc on the right, a rider called Tank on the left, with Hawk and Wrench bringing up the rear. As they'd turned their bikes to head back east, away from the approaching tornado, the first debris had begun hitting them. Branches, trash, gravel thrown up by the intensifying winds. "The bridge is starting to go," Hawk had shouted through the comm system. The old structure, already weakened by years of neglect, was beginning to sway visibly, boards pulling free from their moorings as the tornado's outer rotation reached them. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? Sargent had given his Harley everything it had, the powerful engine roaring in defiance of the storm as they raced toward solid ground. Behind them, Lily had caught a glimpse of the bridge beginning to tear apart, sections of wooden planking ripping away into the vortex. They had barely cleared the eastern end of the bridge when the structure gave way completely. The sound of splintering wood and twisting metal had been lost in the tornado's roar as Carpenter Bridge, Lily's childhood sanctuary, was torn from its foundations and swept into the churning funnel cloud. "Head for the highway underpass," Sargent had ordered through the comm system. The concrete underpass, where Route 9 crossed beneath the interstate, was known locally as a storm shelter of last resort. Not ideal, but better than being exposed to the full fury of the tornado. The 5 motorcycles had raced through streets now empty of other vehicles, debris flying around them as the tornado continued its destructive path just blocks away. Lily had clung to Sargent with what little strength she had, her face pressed against his leather vest, the cold rain soaking through her clothes. They'd reached the underpass with moments to spare, joining a handful of other vehicles whose drivers had sought shelter there. The veterans had positioned their motorcycles against the concrete wall, creating a barrier between Lily and the storm's fury. "I'm a nurse," Doc had told her as they huddled in the relative safety of the concrete structure. "Can you tell me what treatment you're on? Any medications I should know about?" Lily had managed to explain her diagnosis through chattering teeth, the adrenaline crash, leaving her even weaker than before. Doc had removed his own leather jacket, wrapping it around her shoulders while checking her pulse. "Your mom works at Peaceful Pines Nursing Home, right?" Tank had asked suddenly. When Lily nodded in surprise, he'd explained, "My grandfather was there before he passed, Jessica Harper. She showed his pictures to everyone who'd listen, talked about her daughter fighting cancer. That's you, isn't it?" The personal connection had somehow made the surreal situation more grounded. These weren't just random bikers. They were part of the community, people whose lives had indirectly touched her own even before this moment. The tornado had passed within a quarter mile of their position, close enough that the pressure drop had made their ears pop painfully. The underpass had creaked and groaned under the strain, but the solid concrete construction had held. For nearly 20 minutes, they'd waited out the worst of the storm, the veterans forming a protective circle around Lily, using their bodies to shield her from flying debris and the biting wind. When the roar had finally diminished and the emergency alerts on their phones indicated the tornado had moved northeast of town, Sargent had checked in with the riders who had continued to the hospital. The hospital took some damage to the west wing, but no casualties, he'd reported to the others. They've been looking for a missing oncology patient. I'm guessing that's you, he'd added, turning to Lily. She had nodded guiltily. I just needed to get out for a while. I didn't know the storm would hit so fast. Never apologize for wanting to feel normal, Hawk had told her quietly. The oldest of the veterans, with silver hair pulled back in a ponytail, he'd spoken with the gentle authority of someone who understood suffering intimately. But maybe next time, check the weather first. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. The ride to the hospital had been slower, more cautious, as they'd navigated streets littered with debris and downed power lines. Sargent had maintained a steady speed, conscious of the fragile passenger holding onto him. The other riders had maintained their protective formation, creating a buffer between Lily and the hazards around them. At the hospital's emergency entrance, Jessica Harper had been waiting, her face a mask of terror and relief as the motorcycles pulled up. She had rushed forward as Sargent helped Lily dismount, enveloping her daughter in a desperate embrace. "I thought I'd lost you," she'd sobbed, pulling back to examine Lily for injuries. "When they told me you weren't in your room, and then the tornado. God, Lily, what were you thinking?" "I'm sorry, Mom," Lily had managed, her strength finally giving out as hospital staff arrived with a wheelchair. "I just needed to feel free for a little while." It was Doc who had stepped forward then, his medical training taking over as he gave the emergency staff a concise report on Lily's condition and the exposure she'd experienced. "She needs to be checked for hypothermia and shock. She's on day 3 of her chemo cycle. You'll need to run her labs again." Jessica had finally turned her attention to the leather-clad men who had delivered her daughter safely. "You found her? You brought her back?" "Right place, right time, Mom," Sargent had replied with military formality. "Your daughter's got guts. Held on like a pro through some pretty rough riding." As the emergency staff had wheeled Lily inside for examination, Jessica had impulsively hugged each of the veterans, tears streaming down her face. "I don't even know how to thank you. If you hadn't found her—" "No thanks necessary," Sargent had assured her. "We're the Storm Riders MC. Helping people is what we do. And checking on people we've helped is also what we do," Doc had added, handing Jessica a card with his number. "Call if you or Lily need anything at all." What none of them had realized in that moment was that this chance encounter, a desperate rescue on a collapsing bridge during one of the worst tornadoes in Millfield's history, would develop into something none of them could have anticipated. Something that would transform not just Lily's cancer journey, but the lives of everyone involved. The tornado that hit Millfield that April day destroyed 27 buildings, damaged hundreds more, and miraculously resulted in no fatalities, though there were dozens of injuries. Local news coverage initially focused on the property damage and the community response, but within days, the story of the motorcycle veterans who had rescued a cancer patient from Carpenter Bridge began to circulate. "Veteran bikers save teen from bridge collapse," read the headline in the Millfield Gazette. The accompanying photo, captured by a storm chaser who'd been monitoring the tornado's path, showed the line of motorcycles racing away from the bridge just as sections began tearing away behind them. For Lily, the aftermath of her reckless decision brought a mixture of consequences. Her doctors scolded her for putting herself at risk, explaining that her compromised immune system made exposure to the elements particularly dangerous. Her mother alternated between grateful tears and stern lectures about responsibility, but something else happened too. Something unexpected. 3 days after the rescue, as Lily was undergoing her next round of chemotherapy, the hospital room door had opened to reveal Sergeant Doc and the other 3 riders who had been on the bridge, all cleaned up and bearing gifts. "Hope we're not intruding," Sergeant had said, suddenly looking less intimidating in plain clothes, though his military bearing remained evident. "We wanted to check on our passenger. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep?" Lily, weak from the treatment but brightening at the sight of her rescuers, had managed to smile. "My escort service. Come in." The veterans had brought thoughtful gifts, a portable phone charger, so you're never without communication again, Sergeant had explained. Warm hats for her bare head, ginger chews for nausea that Doc swore by for his chemo patients, and most touching, a leather bracelet bearing the Storm Riders insignia. "Honorary member," Hawk had told her as he fastened it around her thin wrist. "You rode through hell with us. That makes you one of ours." What had begun as a courtesy visit had extended into hours of conversation. The veterans had shared stories from their service days, the sanitized versions, carefully edited for a teenage audience, and Lily had found herself laughing for the first time in months. These men, who had seen the worst humanity had to offer in war zones across the globe, somehow knew exactly how to talk to her, not as a fragile patient inspiring pity, but as a fellow survivor with battle stories of her own. Jessica, returning from her shift to find her daughter's room filled with leather-clad bikers, had been momentarily startled, but the sound of Lily's laughter, a sound she had feared she might never hear again, had melted any reservations. "You're welcome any time," she'd told them as visiting hours ended. "I haven't seen her this animated in months." The any time had quickly become often. Narasuro, the Storm Riders established a rotation, ensuring that Lily had a visitor every day, sometimes just one rider stopping by between work shifts, sometimes several coming together with games, books, or simply conversation to distract her from the grueling treatment. For the veterans, many of whom struggled with their own demons from combat experiences, the visits provided unexpected healing. The same protective instincts that had driven them onto the bridge during the tornado found constructive focus in supporting Lily's cancer battle. "It's like having 19 overprotective uncles," Lily had commented to her mother after Tank had firmly but politely sent away a hospital volunteer who had entered the room coughing. "They treat this room like a forward operating base." The Storm Riders' support extended beyond hospital visits. When they learned that Jessica was working double shifts to cover medical expenses, they organized a benefit ride that brought motorcycle clubs from 3 states to Millfield. The event raised over $20,000 for Lily's treatment, enough to allow Jessica to reduce her hours and spend more time with her daughter. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. When Lily expressed frustration at falling behind in school, Hawk, who had been a high school mathematics teacher before and after his military service, began tutoring her. Other riders with specialized knowledge joined in, turning her hospital room into an impromptu classroom where chemistry, literature, and history were taught between medical procedures. The relationships deepened as weeks turned into months. The veterans became attuned to Lily's treatment schedule, knowing which days would be her strongest and which would leave her too nauseated and exhausted for company. They coordinated with her medical team, with Doc's nursing background, providing valuable insight into how best to support her care. For Lily, the Storm Riders offered something beyond medical support or financial assistance. They represented a kind of strength she desperately needed to witness, men who had faced death, who carried both visible and invisible scars from their experiences, yet continued to live with purpose and even joy. "How do you do it?" she'd asked Sergeant one particularly difficult day, when the chemotherapy had left her feeling as though her body were burning from the inside out. "How do you keep going when everything hurts?" Sergeant had considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "In the Marines, they taught us that pain is just weakness leaving the body. That's motivational poster garbage," he'd said bluntly. "Pain is pain. It's awful. It can break you if you face it alone. But you're not alone, Lily. You've got your mom, you've got your medical team, and now you've got us. We hold the line together." The holding the line mentality became a mantra for Lily's treatment. On days when she felt she couldn't endure another round of chemotherapy, another needle, another scan, the Storm Riders reminded her that courage wasn't about feeling fearless. It was about continuing forward despite the fear. 4 months after the tornado, Lily's scans showed significant improvement. The aggressive treatment was working, the tumors were shrinking, her blood work was trending toward normal ranges. There was cautious optimism among her medical team. To celebrate the good news, the Storm Riders organized something special. Working with the hospital administration and Lily's doctors, they arranged for a carefully supervised motorcycle ride, her first ever. "We can't take you on the open road yet," Sargent explained as they wheeled a gleaming Harley into the hospital parking lot one sunny Saturday. "But we can give you a taste of the freedom." With Doc monitoring her vital signs and Jessica watching nervously nearby, Lily had been seated on the stationary motorcycle, her hands guided to the grips, her feet to the pegs. The other riders had surrounded her, teaching her the basics of motorcycle operation with the patience of men who understood that this was about more than mechanics. It was about reclaiming control in a life where control had been stripped away by illness. "When you're well enough," Tank had promised, "we'll teach you to ride for real. By the time you're 18, you'll have your license." The promise of a future, of milestone birthdays, of new skills to master, of experiences waiting beyond the hospital walls, had been perhaps the greatest gift the Storm Riders had given her. Cancer had narrowed Lily's vision to the next treatment, the next blood draw, the next scan. The veterans had widened it again, reminding her that her life story extended beyond her diagnosis. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? By the 6-month mark after the tornado, the Storm Riders Motorcycle Club had become so integrated into Lily and Jessica's lives that the hospital staff referred to them collectively as Lily's Army. The riders coordinated their visits with military precision, ensuring that Lily's room was never without support during difficult procedures or long treatment days. More importantly, they had expanded their protective circle to include other pediatric oncology patients. What had begun as a focused mission to support the girl they'd rescued from the bridge had evolved into a broader commitment to children fighting cancer. Riders would visit the oncology ward with therapy dogs, video games, art supplies, whatever would bring moments of normalcy and joy to the clinical environment. "You started something bigger than yourself," Jessica told Lily one evening as they watched a group of riders organizing a Halloween costume parade through the pediatric wing. "Your army is changing how these kids experience treatment." Lily, now with a 1/4 inch of soft hair beginning to regrow on her head, had watched the preparations thoughtfully. "I didn't do anything except get stuck on a bridge during a tornado," she'd replied. "They're the ones doing all this." "But they're doing it because of you," Jessica had insisted. "Because one scared kid reminded 19 tough veterans what it means to protect something precious." As fall turned to winter, Lily's strength gradually returned. Her final scan in November showed no detectable cancer, not an official remission yet, but a significant milestone that called for celebration. The Storm Riders organized a surprise party in the hospital's community room, complete with a cake bearing their lightning bolt insignia alongside the purple ribbon symbol for Hodgkin's lymphoma. "To Lily," Sargent had toasted, raising a cup of punch as the other riders formed a circle around her. "Who taught a bunch of old warriors what real courage looks like?" "To the Storm Riders," Lily had countered, "who showed up exactly when I needed you most." The bond formed on that bridge during the tornado had transformed into something rare and precious, a chosen family forged in crisis but sustained by genuine connection. For 19 veterans searching for purpose after military service, a teenage girl fighting cancer had provided an unexpected mission. And for Lily Harper, battling an enemy within her own body, 19 battle-tested warriors had shown up to ensure she didn't fight alone. As the year's first snow fell outside the hospital windows, Lily stood surrounded by her unlikely guardians, the leather bracelet still secured around her wrist, her mother's arm around her shoulders. The path ahead remained uncertain. Follow-up treatments, regular monitoring, the ever-present fear of recurrence that all cancer patients carry. But one thing was certain. Whatever challenges awaited, Lily Harper would face them with an army at her back, and the knowledge that sometimes, in our darkest moments, help arrives in the most unexpected forms. Like 19 veteran motorcyclists showing up exactly when needed. Winter in Millfield brought a different kind of challenge for Lily. Though her scans remained clear and her strength continued to improve, the emotional aftermath of intense treatment began to surface. Nightmares about the tornado and the collapsing bridge intertwined with anxiety about cancer recurrence, creating a psychological storm as daunting as the physical one she had survived. It's entirely normal, her oncology psychologist Dr. Brennan assured her during their weekly session. Your body and mind have been in survival mode for months. Now that you're physically improving, your brain finally has the space to process the trauma. Understanding the cause didn't make the sleepless nights any easier, however. Jessica often woke to find Lily pacing their small home, checking windows and doors, seeking reassurance that they were secure against storms that existed only in her mind. The storm riders, attuned to the rhythms of post-traumatic stress from their own experiences, recognized the signs immediately. Without calling attention to it, they adjusted their support accordingly. Veterans who had found their own ways to manage similar symptoms began sharing their coping strategies, presented not as therapy, but as practical tools from one survivor to another. Hawk introduced Lily to meditation techniques he had learned during his own recovery. Tank, whose massive physique belied his gentle nature, taught her breathing exercises that had helped him through panic attacks after his tours in Iraq. Wrench, the quietest of the veterans, showed her how working with her hands could anchor her mind in the present when anxiety pulled it toward darker places. Trauma isn't something you just get over, Sargent explained one snowy afternoon as he helped Lily work on the motorcycle maintenance skills Wrench had begun teaching her. It's something you learn to carry differently until eventually it doesn't weigh you down so much. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. The motorcycle lessons had become a regular weekend activity, weather permitting. What had started as a symbolic moment in the hospital parking lot had evolved into genuine instruction. Though still too weak to handle a full-size bike on her own, Lily proved to be a quick study on the smaller model the veterans had acquired specifically for her training. The lessons served multiple purposes. Beyond the practical skills being developed, they provided Lily with a sense of progressive mastery at a time when so much of her life still revolved around medical appointments and limitations. Each small achievement, learning to balance, to shift gears, to execute a perfect turn in the empty parking lot where they practiced, built confidence that extended beyond motorcycling. See how you adjusted your weight through that turn? Doc pointed out during one session. 6 months ago, you didn't have the strength for that. You're rebuilding yourself piece by piece. The motorcycle training also gave Lily a connection to the bridge moment that had brought the storm riders into her life. Not as a traumatic memory, but as the beginning of something positive. The same skills that had allowed Sargent to navigate safely during the tornado were now being passed to her, transforming her from rescued to rescuer in training. Jessica, initially hesitant about her daughter learning to ride, had gradually recognized the therapeutic value. "I've never seen her so focused," she admitted to Sargent. "When she's on that bike, cancer is the furthest thing from her mind." As Lily's physical strength returned, she began accompanying the storm riders on their community service projects. Not as a recipient of help, but as a participant. She joined them in delivering holiday meals to homebound veterans, in organizing care packages for deployed troops, in fundraising events for the local children's hospital where she had spent so many months. For the veterans, Lily's presence changed the dynamic of their service work. Her youth and optimism balanced their sometimes cynical worldview, while her first-hand understanding of vulnerability allowed her to connect with those they helped in ways the veterans sometimes couldn't. "You're our secret weapon," Tank joked after Lily had spent an hour talking with a reluctant teenage patient at the VA hospital, convincing him to accept the therapy he'd been resisting. Nobody can say no to the kid who survived cancer in a tornado. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? The Storm Riders had always been respected in Millfield, but their connection with Lily elevated their standing in the community significantly. Local businesses that had previously viewed the leather-clad motorcyclists with caution now offered their parking lots for training sessions, donated to their causes, even sponsored their events. "You've made us respectable," Hawk teased Lily during a community fundraiser where the mayor had publicly praised their work. "We used to be scary biker dudes. Now we're beloved local heroes." "You were always heroes," Lily had countered. "People just needed help seeing it." As spring approached, marking a year since the tornado and Lily's diagnosis, the Storm Riders proposed an ambitious project. The remains of Carpenter Bridge had been cleared away after the storm, but no plans existed to rebuild it. The county lacked the budget, and the bridge's limited use didn't prioritize it for reconstruction. "That bridge meant something to you and your mom," Sargent said during a club meeting where Lily and Jessica had been invited as honorary members. "And now it means something to all of us. We think it should be rebuilt." The proposal was for a community-led reconstruction, funded through donations, built with volunteer labor under professional supervision, and designed to modern safety standards while honoring the historical character of the original structure. The Storm Riders would spearhead the effort, leveraging their construction skills. Many had worked in building trades after leaving military service, and their growing community connections. "We're calling it the Phoenix Bridge Project," Doc explained, revealing concept drawings created by an architectural firm that had offered their services pro bono. Rising from the destruction, stronger than before. For Lily, the project represented something profound, the reclamation of a place that had been both sanctuary and site of trauma. The bridge where she had nearly lost her life would be reborn as a symbol of community resilience, of connections formed in crisis. Jessica, seeing the meaning behind the gesture, had been moved to tears. "You all have done so much already," she'd said. "Why take on something this big?" "Because we need missions that matter," Sargent had answered simply. "Because rebuilding is what survivors do." The Phoenix Bridge Project quickly gained traction throughout Millfield. Local businesses donated materials, skilled tradespeople offered expertise, and community members volunteered labor. What might have been just another infrastructure project became a town-wide effort to heal not just the physical damage from the tornado, but the communal trauma it had caused. The Storm Riders were the unquestioned leaders of the initiative, organizing work crews with military efficiency, ensuring safety protocols were followed rigorously, and maintaining morale through the inevitable setbacks. Veterans from outside their club joined the effort, finding purpose in the physical labor and the camaraderie it fostered. For Lily, who was still rebuilding her own strength, the project provided a tangible parallel to her recovery journey. She couldn't operate heavy equipment or lift construction materials, but she documented the progress through photography, a passion she had set aside during treatment and now reclaimed with renewed creativity. "You're creating the visual history of this bridge," Hawk encouraged her as she experimented with different perspectives and lighting. 50 years from now, people will understand what happened here through your eyes. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. Spring bloomed into summer, and the bridge gradually took shape. Lily's photography skills developed alongside it, her initially hesitant shots evolving into compelling visual narratives that captured not just construction details, but the human connections forming around the project. Her health continued to improve as well. The regular follow-up scans showed no signs of cancer's return, and her strength and stamina increased steadily. Though still thinner than before her illness, and with hair that had grown back in soft curls rather than her previous straight style, Lily increasingly resembled the teenager she would have been without cancer's interruption. On the one-year anniversary of her final chemotherapy treatment, the Storm Riders organized a special surprise. Lily arrived at the bridge construction site to find not just the usual work crew, but a gathering of everyone who had been part of her cancer journey. Medical staff from the oncology ward, teachers who had provided homebound instruction, classmates who had kept in touch throughout her treatment, and at the center all 19 original Storm Riders in their full club regalia. "We have an announcement," Sergeant declared once everyone had assembled. Two announcements, actually. The first was that the Phoenix Bridge was ahead of schedule, with completion projected for early fall rather than the winter timeline originally established. The second announcement was directed specifically at Lily. "The Storm Riders Motorcycle Club has existed for 5 years, Sergeant explained. "In that time, we've never created an honorary membership category, until now." Hawk stepped forward, carrying what appeared to be a leather vest similar to those worn by the veterans, but sized for Lily's smaller frame. On the back was the club's lightning bolt insignia, with a new addition, a purple ribbon intertwined with the bolt, symbolizing her cancer journey. Lily Harper, for courage in the face of both natural disaster and personal battle, for inspiring 19 old warriors to be better men, and for showing us all what true resilience looks like, we hereby name you an honorary Storm Rider, the first and only in our club's history. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? The vest was more than decorative. It represented something profound, the transformation of a chance rescue into a permanent bond, the acknowledgement that Lily had earned her place in their brotherhood through her own form of battle. Jessica, watching her daughter accept this symbol of belonging, reflected on how far they had come from the desperate days of diagnosis, from the terror of the tornado, from the uncertainty that had clouded their future. The Storm Riders had entered their lives as rescuers in a moment of crisis, but they had remained as family through the longer, quieter crisis of recovery. As summer progressed toward fall, the Phoenix Bridge neared completion. The structure was modern in its engineering, but honored the aesthetic of the original, a thoughtful balance of nostalgia and progress that reflected Lily's own journey. The old bridge could never be truly restored, just as Lily could never return to her pre-cancer self. But what replaced it was stronger, more resilient, designed to withstand future storms. Lily's photography of the project had attracted attention beyond Millfield. A regional arts magazine had published a selection of her images, and a gallery in the state capital had expressed interest in exhibiting the complete series when the bridge was finished. Her talent, nurtured during long hours of recovery when her physical activity was limited, was blossoming into a potential career path. The Storm Riders took particular pride in this development, having witnessed her progression from hesitant snapshots to compelling visual storytelling. Several members had contributed to a fund that provided professional-grade equipment, while others had connected her with photographers in their extended network who offered mentorship. "You've got a good eye for the story behind the moment," Hawk told her as they reviewed her latest bridge photos. "That's something you can't teach. Either you see it or you don't. You definitely see it." The Phoenix Bridge was scheduled for dedication in early October, exactly 18 months after the tornado that had destroyed its predecessor. The timing aligned almost perfectly with another significant milestone. Lily's medical team was preparing to officially declare her in remission, pending one final round of scans and tests. The parallel wasn't lost on anyone. Bridge and patient, both torn apart by forces beyond their control, both rebuilt through community effort and individual resilience, both preparing to mark new beginnings. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. In the week leading up to the bridge dedication, Lily underwent her final comprehensive evaluation at the Oncology Center. The Storm Riders maintained their tradition of ensuring she never faced medical appointments alone. At least one rider was always present in the waiting room, ready to distract her with conversation or simply provide silent solidarity. The results, delivered 2 days before the bridge ceremony, confirmed what her interim scans had suggested: complete remission, with an excellent prognosis for long-term survival. The news, while expected, hit Lily with unexpected emotional force. 18 months of fighting, of fear, of rebuilding her body cell by cell, had culminated in this moment of medical validation. "I don't know how to feel," she confessed to Sargent as they sat in the hospital garden after receiving the news. Jessica had gone to complete the paperwork for Lily's transition to the survivorship program, leaving her daughter with the man who had pulled her from the bridge during the tornado. Happy seems too simple. Relieved isn't enough either. Sargent considered this with the thoughtfulness he brought to all their conversations. When we completed difficult missions overseas, there was always this strange moment afterward. Exhaustion mixed with pride, mixed with disbelief that it was really over. And underneath this question of, who am I now that this fight is done? Lily nodded, recognizing the truth in his observation. Exactly. Cancer has been my whole identity for so long. Patient, fighter, survivor now, I guess. But who is Lily without cancer? That's the mission you get to define for yourself, Sargent replied, and unlike cancer, it's one you choose. The bridge dedication ceremony became more than a community celebration. It became a symbolic transition for Lily herself, a crossing from one phase of her life to the next. The Storm Riders had worked with the town council to plan an event that honored both the historical significance of Carpenter Bridge and its phoenix-like rebirth as a symbol of Millfield's resilience. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and cool, perfect October weather that seemed designed to showcase the bridge at its best. The structure gleamed in the autumn sunlight, its steel supports and wooden walkway creating a harmony of strength and warmth. Community members gathered on both banks of Miller Creek, waiting for the official opening that would reconnect neighborhoods separated since the tornado. The Storm Riders arrived in formation, 19 motorcycles in perfect alignment, their engines creating a rolling thunder that echoed off the water below. Lily rode with Sargent, just as she had during the rescue, but this time as an active participant rather than a terrified passenger. Behind them came Jessica, riding with Doc on a motorcycle she had secretly learned to handle during the months of Lily's recovery. Mayor Wilson welcomed the crowd, acknowledging the county officials, contractors, and volunteers who had made the project possible. But the central focus of his remarks was the unique partnership that had driven the reconstruction, the unlikely alliance between a teenage cancer patient and a veterans motorcycle club. 18 months ago, Carpenter Bridge was destroyed by one of the worst tornadoes in our town's history, the mayor noted. On that same day, 19 veterans risked their lives to rescue a young girl caught in the storm's path. Today, we dedicate not just a new bridge, but a testament to what becomes possible when a community unites around those in need. Only if you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? Lily, wearing her honorary Storm Rider's vest over a dress Jessica had insisted upon for the occasion, was invited to speak. Public speaking had never been her strength, and the crowd of several hundred was intimidating. But as she approached the microphone, she felt the solid presence of the veterans behind her, literal and figurative backup that gave her the courage to find her voice. When I was diagnosed with cancer, I felt like my life had been swept away by a storm I couldn't see or fight, she began, her voice gaining strength with each word. "When I was trapped on the old bridge during the tornado, I faced a storm I could see, but still couldn't fight. What I've learned through both experiences is that some storms you can't battle alone." She gestured to the rebuilt bridge behind her. "This structure isn't just about crossing Miller Creek. It's about the connections we build with each other during our worst moments. It's about 19 veterans who showed up exactly when needed and then stayed long after the emergency was over. It's about a community that rebuilds what storms destroy," Lily continued, acknowledging her mother's unwavering support, her medical team's expertise, her friends who had maintained connection despite her long absence from normal teenage life. But she returned, as always, to the storm riders, the unexpected guardians who had transformed her cancer journey from isolated suffering into a supported battle. "I stand here today in remission, on a bridge that was rebuilt by the same hands that pulled me from its falling predecessor. The old bridge is gone, the cancer is gone, but what remains, what we've built together, is stronger than what we lost." The ceremony concluded with a ribbon cutting where Lily and Sargent together sliced through the ceremonial barrier, officially opening the Phoenix Bridge to the community. As applause erupted from both banks, the storm riders started their engines in unison, creating a roaring salute that echoed across the water. The official event transitioned into a community celebration with food trucks, local bands, and activities spread across both sides of the creek. The Phoenix Bridge, now filled with pedestrians exploring the new structure, served exactly the purpose for which it had been designed, connecting people who had been separated, providing a path across what had once been an obstacle. For Lily, moving through the celebration brought a series of full-circle moments. The oncology nurses who had cared for her during her darkest days now took selfies with her on the bridge, exclaiming over her recovery. Classmates who had only known her as the sick girl engaged with her as a peer again, making plans for her return to regular classes in the spring semester. Most meaningful were the interactions with younger cancer patients, children from the pediatric oncology ward who had been brought to the celebration by their families. To them, Lily represented a tangible hope, proof that the other side of treatment existed and could be reached. The storm riders had arranged for these children to receive special attention during the event, with motorcycle demonstrations, bridge tours, and gift bags containing child-sized leather bracelets bearing the club's insignia. "You're showing them the road ahead," Doc observed as Lily spoke with a 9-year-old girl recently diagnosed with leukemia, "just like we tried to do for you." As the celebration continued into evening, Lily found a quiet moment alone at the center of the bridge, the exact spot where she had stood frozen in fear as the tornado approached 18 months earlier. The contrast between that moment and this one was stark. Then she had been alone, terrified, believing herself to be at the end of her life's journey. Now, she stood surrounded by community, in remission, with a future opening before her like a road unfurling toward the horizon. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. Sargent joined her at the railing, respecting her reflective mood with comfortable silence before finally speaking. "Penny, for your thoughts, kid. I was just thinking about how different everything is from the last time I stood in this exact spot," Lily replied. "Different bridge, different me. Better bridge," Sargent noted. "Better you?" Lily considered this. "Not better, exactly, just more. I know things now I didn't know before, about suffering, about survival, about showing up for people." She touched the storm rider's vest she wore, fingers tracing the lightning bolt emblem. "About family that finds you when you least expect it." The celebration wound down as darkness fell, lanterns illuminating the new bridge with a warm glow that reflected off the creek below. The storm riders gathered for a final tradition, a motorcycle procession across the structure they had helped rebuild, their headlights cutting through the evening like beacons. Lily rode with Sargent, just as she had during the rescue, completing the symbolic journey from disaster to recovery. Jessica followed on Doc's bike, and behind them came the remaining 17 riders, the complete team that had formed Lily's protective circle throughout her cancer battle. As they reached the far side and circled back, Lily was struck by the poetry of the moment. 19 motorcycles crossing the bridge they had helped create, carrying the girl they had rescued on the bridge that came before. The symmetry felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. The months that followed brought new developments and milestones. Lily returned to school full-time, navigating the social complexities of reintegration with the same determination she had brought to her medical challenges. Her photography continued to develop, with her Phoenix Bridge series receiving regional recognition and exhibition opportunities. Jessica, inspired by the medical professionals who had cared for her daughter, enrolled in nursing school, a long-deferred dream now made possible by the financial support generated through the Storm Riders' fundraising efforts. Her experiences as a patient's mother gave her unique insight into the family side of medical care, insight that her instructors recognized as invaluable. The Storm Riders expanded their support programs for pediatric cancer patients, using the lessons learned through Lily's journey to create more comprehensive assistance for families facing similar battles. Their leather vests became familiar sights in hospital corridors, bringing comfort rather than intimidation to children fighting invisible enemies within their own bodies. Lily's role evolved as well. As her strength returned fully, she progressed from passenger to novice rider, earning her motorcycle permit on her 17th birthday with Sergeant as her primary instructor. The same hands that had pulled her from danger now guided her toward mastery, teaching control, balance, and the freedom that came with both. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep? More importantly, she became a bridge herself, connecting the veteran bikers to the pediatric patients, translating between military experience and childhood suffering, helping each group understand the other's unique perspective on survival. Her dual identity as cancer survivor and honorary storm rider made her uniquely positioned to facilitate these connections. 2 years after the tornado, as Lily prepared for her high school graduation and the photography scholarship she had earned at the State University, she reflected on the strange alchemy that had transformed disaster into opportunity. The tornado that had nearly killed her had brought the Storm Riders into her life. The cancer that had threatened to end her future had instead reshaped it in ways she could never have anticipated. The evening before graduation, the Storm Riders organized a special ride, a procession that began at the hospital where Lily had received treatment, continued to the Phoenix Bridge that symbolized their collective rebuilding, and concluded at the VFW Hall where the club had first formed. At each location they paused for reflection, acknowledging the journey's key waypoints. At the hall, decorated for the occasion with Lily's bridge photographs and memorabilia from her treatment days, Sergeant presented her with a gift from the entire club, a small but powerful motorcycle, perfect for a new rider, customized with the Storm Riders insignia and her initials. "For the road ahead," he said simply, handing her the keys. "Wherever it takes you." Jessica, watching her daughter accept this symbol of independence with tears in her eyes, marveled at the transformation 2 years had wrought. The frightened, fragile girl on the bridge had become a confident young woman with plans, purpose, and a chosen family that extended far beyond biological connections. "When you were diagnosed," she told Lily later that evening, "I was so afraid of losing you that I couldn't see beyond the next treatment, the next scan. I never imagined we'd find so much in the middle of losing so much." Lily understood exactly what her mother meant. Cancer had taken her health, her hair, months of normal teenage life. The tornado had destroyed a cherished landmark, nearly claimed her life. But from those losses had come gains that defied measurement. 19 veteran guardians, a community united in purpose, a direction for her future that felt both chosen and destined. On graduation day, as Lily crossed the stage to receive her diploma, the sound of motorcycle engines revved in perfect unison from the parking lot, a salute from the storm riders that brought laughter from the audience and tears to Lily's eyes. The message was clear. They were celebrating from a respectful distance, but they were unquestionably present, just as they had been at every significant moment for the past 2 years. The summer before college became a time of preparation and transition. Lily divided her days between photography projects, increasing her riding skills under the storm riders' tutelage and mentoring younger cancer patients through a program she had helped design at the hospital. Each activity represented a facet of her identity: artist, rider, survivor, roles that had emerged from the crucible of her illness and the tornado that had nearly claimed her life. If you're enjoying the story, write from which city you are listening to in the comments. As August approached, and with it the beginning of her university studies, Lily faced the first significant separation from the support system that had carried her through cancer treatment and recovery. The campus was 3 hours from Millfield, close enough for weekend visits, but too far for the daily connection she had come to rely upon. "I'm not sure I know how to do this without all of you watching over me," she admitted during her final Storm Riders meeting before departure. "What if the cancer comes back while I'm away? What if I'm not strong enough on my own?" The veterans exchanged knowing glances. They understood transition anxiety intimately from their own experiences, leaving military service and the brotherhood it provided. "First," Sergeant said firmly, "you are never truly on your own. Distance doesn't change what we are to each other. Second, you are absolutely strong enough. We've seen that strength tested in ways most people never experience. And third," Hawke added with characteristic wisdom, "learning to carry your experiences into new territories is part of the journey. You're not leaving us behind. You're taking what we've built together and expanding its reach." Doc, whose medical background had made him particularly attuned to Lily's health concerns, offered practical reassurance. "We've arranged for your medical records to be transferred to the University Health Center. They have an excellent oncology department affiliated with their teaching hospital, and I'll be checking in weekly for updates." The night before Lily's departure for university, the Storm Riders organized one final ride, a sunset procession across the Phoenix Bridge and through Millfield, with Lily leading on her own motorcycle for the first time. Jessica followed directly behind her, having earned her own license in the month since the bridge dedication. The symmetry of the moment wasn't lost on anyone. Mother and daughter riding independently, but in formation, surrounded by the 19 veterans who had transformed from rescuers to family. They rode past the hospital where Lily had fought cancer, past her high school, where she would no longer walk the halls, past the neighborhoods where she had grown up, completing a circuit of the life she was preparing to expand beyond. At the Phoenix Bridge, they stopped for a final ceremony. Lily parked at the center, the exact spot where she had stood alone in the face of the tornado 2.5 years earlier. Now, rather than isolation and fear, she was surrounded by strength and connection. "This bridge has witnessed both your most vulnerable moment and your greatest triumph," Sergeant said, addressing not just Lily, but the gathered riders and community members who had come to wish her well. "It reminds us that between disaster and recovery lies the work of rebuilding, work that requires many hands." He presented Lily with a leather-bound album containing photographs of the entire journey. From news images of the tornado rescue to candid shots of hospital visits, bridge construction work, motorcycle lessons, and celebrations of medical milestones. The final page held a map with 19 signatures surrounding the route from Millfield to her university campus. "So you remember the road that brought you here," he explained, "and the people who will always have your back, no matter how far you ride. If you've watched this far, say in the comments, what secret do you keep?" As she prepared to leave the following morning, loading her motorcycle and limited belongings into the small trailer Jessica would drive alongside her, Lily took a moment to visit the Phoenix Bridge one last time. The early morning light cast long shadows across the structure, now fully integrated into community life as if it had always been there. She thought about the strange path that had led her to this moment, how a desperate escape from her hospital room during a tornado warning had resulted in near tragedy on the old bridge, how 19 veteran motorcyclists had appeared exactly when needed, risking their own safety to rescue a stranger, how that chance encounter had evolved into a support system that carried her through cancer treatment, recovery, and beyond. The sound of approaching motorcycles broke her reverie. The storm riders arrived in formation, not just the original 19, but the expanded club that now included additional veterans and support members drawn by the pediatric cancer initiative Lily had helped inspire. "You didn't think we'd let you leave without an escort, did you?" Sergeant called as they pulled up beside her. "First rule of the storm riders, we see missions through to completion." "And what mission is that?" Lily asked, though she already knew the answer. "The one that started on this bridge 2.5 years ago," he replied. "Keeping you safe, getting you where you need to go, making sure you know you're never riding alone." The escort to university became something more than a goodbye. It became a transition ceremony, a mobile commemoration of everything they had built together. The procession stretched for nearly a mile, Lily in the lead on her motorcycle, Jessica following in the car with the trailer, and behind them, the storm riders in perfect formation, their bikes gleaming in the morning sunlight. As they crossed the county line, the first shift occurred. 5 riders peeled away with honking horns and raised fists, returning to Millfield for work obligations and family responsibilities. An hour later, another group departed with similar salutes. By the time they reached the university campus, only the original 19 remained, the veterans who had pulled Lily from the collapsing bridge during the tornado. The symmetry felt perfect. The same 19 who had entered her life at its most desperate moment would witness her transition to this new chapter. As they helped unload her belongings and set up her dormitory room, the veterans seemed both out of place in the academic setting and exactly where they belonged, continuing the protection mission that had evolved into something far more nuanced than physical safety. Before departing, they gathered one last time in the dormitory parking lot. No speeches were necessary. The journey they had shared transcended words. Instead, they formed the circle that had become their tradition during milestone moments, with Lily and Jessica at the center. "The storm riders have a saying," Sergeant said finally, breaking the emotional silence. "Weather forms on the horizon, but brotherhood forms in the heart. Distance doesn't change that. Time doesn't change that." "Then nothing changes that," Lily affirmed, embracing each veteran in turn. These 19 men who had transformed from strangers to saviors to family in the span of 2.5 extraordinary years. As they mounted their motorcycles for the return journey to Millfield, Lily and Jessica stood watching. The teenage cancer survivor, now a university freshman, the struggling single mother, now a nursing student. Both forever changed by the brotherhood that had formed around them during the darkest storm of their lives. The sound of 19 engines starting in perfect unison echoed across the campus. A final salute that symbolized not an ending, but a continuation. The bridge between Lily's past and future remained intact, supported by the unlikely pillars of veteran motorcyclists who had shown up exactly when needed and never truly left. 3 years after a frightened girl with cancer had found herself alone on a bridge, swept away by a tornado, she stood at the threshold of her future, carrying with her the strength, wisdom, and connection forged in that moment of crisis. The storm riders had given her more than rescue. They had shown her how to rebuild after destruction, how to find purpose in suffering, and most importantly, how to carry forward the legacy of showing up for others when they need it most. As the sound of motorcycles faded into the distance, Lily touched the storm rider's patch on her jacket and smiled. Some people spent lifetimes searching for their place in the world. She had found hers in the most unexpected way, through cancer, through disaster, through 19 veteran motorcyclists who had transformed tragedy into triumph, one day at a time.